David Letterman stopped mid-sentence. The laugh line he'd been building toward just dissolved on his tongue. The studio, which had been rolling with one of those easy waves of laughter that came when everything in the show was hitting just right, suddenly felt like it had been put on pause. Paul Schaefer's piano, which had been chattering underneath Dave's rhythm like a friendly, jazzy conscience, went silent in an instant. The horn stilled. The drumsticks hovered. The entire late-night studio froze, because in the guest chair, just a few feet away from Letterman's desk, an 11-year-old boy sat absolutely motionless, staring into nothing. No curiosity, no shyness, no fear, nothing. This child had never spoken, never laughed, never shown a single expression in his entire life. But every night, he sat with his family and watched Letterman. And on this November night in 1989, under the hot lights of Studio 6A, with millions of people watching at home and two exhausted parents watching from the third row, something happened that medical science said was impossible. What occurred in the next 8 minutes would be replayed in psychology communication seminars and quiet conversations between therapists for decades. Letterman would break every rule of late-night television. The clock, the cars, the sponsors, all of it would become irrelevant, and a moment of pure, unscripted humanity would shatter the carefully controlled world of network TV forever. It was November 14th, 1989. Outside, New York City was caught between seasons. The air had that sharp, early winter bite, the one that made people in long coats huddle a little closer as they hurried down 6th Avenue. Rockefeller Center was lit up and buzzing, tourists taking photos, office workers heading home, pages in headsets moving in practice choreography. Inside Studio 6A, the familiar engine of Late Night with David Letterman hummed like a machine that had been running perfectly for 7 years straight. The audience was hot, eager, responsive, the kind of crowd the warm-up comedian would later brag about. The blue cards were stacked exactly where they were supposed to be. The band was locked in, every cue tight, every sting perfectly timed. The monologue had landed hard. The jokes about the mayor, about airline food, about whatever strange thing had happened in the news that day had all hit their mark. Letterman sat behind his desk in his standard uniform, charcoal suit, white shirt, burgundy tie. His famous gap-toothed grin flashed in the studio light as he leaned into the camera, writing that precise line between humble Midwestern dork and razor-sharp New York cynic. The crew moved around the edges of the set like ghosts, invisible to the millions watching at home, but crucial to keeping the machine running. Everything was perfect. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly the way it was supposed to be, except for one thing. In the third row, Section B, Seat 14, something was different. A family sat together, a mother on the left, a father on the right, and between them, a small, thin boy. His name was Michael Patterson. He was 11 years old. His sandy brown hair was cut short, almost like a military buzz, more for practicality than style, easier for his mother to manage. He wore a button-up shirt that had clearly been bought a size too big, in that hopeful way parents sometimes buy clothes for children they're not sure will grow the way other children do. His hands rested on his lap, fingers gently curled, perfectly still. His shoulders were relaxed, neither tense nor loose. His breathing was shallow but steady, and his face was a mask. No tension, no soft, not boredom, not in, just a still, neutral plane. His eyes stared straight ahead, unblinking, locked in the general direction of the stage where Letterman was performing. But they didn't quite seem to land on anything. Michael had been diagnosed with severe nonverbal autism. He had never spoken a word in his 11 years of life. He had never made eye contact with another human being, not with his parent, not with his teacher, not with the parade of specialists and therapists that had cycled through his existence. He had never smiled, never laughed, never cried in the way other children cried. He would sometimes vocalize a low hum, a sharp inhale, but the emotional life behind those sounds, if there was one, remained locked away. According to every doctor his parents had consulted over the past decade, Michael existed in a neurological state that made typical emotional connection extraordinarily unlikely, virtually impossible. One specialist had said, using the kind of clinical language that sounded scientific and felt like a verdict. But every single night, at 11:35 p.m., Michael would sit on the couch in their small apartment in Queens. His mother, Linda, would be on his left. His father, Robert, would be on his right. The couch cushions had molded themselves around the shape of their rich. The coffee table in front of them bore the permanent ring mark of 1,000 mugs of late-night coffee. And they would watch Late Night with David Letterman. Michael never looked at his parents during the show. He never reacted when Dave tore the cards up, or dropped something off the roof, or smashed watermelons with a giant hammer. He never flinched when the band went big. He never smiled when Paul cracked a joke. He sat like this, hands on his lap, eyes forward, body still for the entire show. But he was there, present, and over the years, his parents had learned that this was the closest thing together they might ever have with their son. For those 60 minutes, they weren't in 3 separate emotional universes. They were in one small living room, lit by the flicker of the TV, sharing the same sights and sounds, breathing through the same jokes at the same time. It was their version of family. 3 months earlier, on a night when the city outside their window was quiet and Michael had finally fallen asleep, Linda had sat at the small kitchen table with a pen and a lined piece of notebook paper. She was exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that burrows into the bone and lives there, the kind that doesn't go away with sleep, because it isn't about how many hours you've been awake, it's about how many years you've been carrying something you can't set down. The apartment was dim, lit only by the stove light and the ghostly blue glow of the TV in the next room, still showing late-night reruns. She paused for a long time with the pen hovering over the paper before she began to write. The letter was simple. No elaborate story, no dramatic language, just the truth. My son has never laughed, but he watches you every night. I don't know if he understands. I don't know if he feels anything. But it's the only hour of the day when I feel like we're a family. Thank you for that. She stared at what she'd written. It looked too small on the page for what it meant. She thought about crumpling it up, thought about telling herself it was silly, that he'd never see it, that it would get lost in a mailroom bin with hundreds of other letters from people who wanted tickets or autographs or attention. Instead, she folded it, slid it into an envelope, and addressed it to the show. She wrote, "Thank you," on the back of the envelope without really knowing why. She sealed it, mailed it the next morning, and then, slowly, forgot about it. Life went on. Therapy, school meeting, insurance fight, nights of sitting on the couch beside a son who never turned his head. 6 weeks later, the phone rang. Linda almost didn't answer. It was late, and telemarketers had started calling their landline more often, but something made her pick it up. Hello? Hi, is this Linda Patterson? The voice on the other end was warm, professional, just a little too bright. My name is Karen. I'm calling from Late Night with David Letterman. Linda's knees went weak. She had to sit down. The conversation blurred. There were words like, "We got your letter," and "Everyone here was really moved," and "If you'd be willing," and "We'd love to invite you." They didn't just want to send tickets. They wanted to seat them up close in the front section. And maybe, just maybe, if the moment felt right, Letterman would acknowledge. Linda cried for 20 minutes after she hung up. Robert sat across from, stunned, his own eyes wet. Michael sat on the couch, hands still, watching a muted TV commercial. Now here they were. The show that night was well into its second segment. Letterman was doing a bit with a man who collected vintage thermometers, a deliberately odd late-night style guest, the sort of person who existed purely to let Dave T. deadpan and react. The audience laughed politely at the stranger's hobby. Paul hit a few playful stings after each of Dave's comments. The cameras glided along their usual track. The stagehands watched from the dark, ready for the next prop. Everything looked normal. During the commercial break, as the band played the transition out and the applause sign blinked off, a stage manager approached Letterman's desk. He bent down, hand covering his headset mic, and whispered something close to Dave's ear. Letterman listened, nodding once or twice. As he did, something in his face shifted. The familiar playful smirk faded. The sparkle of mischief in his eyes dimmed. His posture straight, then softened. He glanced out into the audience, scanning rows of faces under the bright, flattening light. His eyes found Linda, clutching her purse in a white-knuckle grip. Robert, shoulders tense, jaw set like a man bracing for impact. And Michael, perfectly still between them, staring straight ahead. Their eyes did not meet. Michael's never did, but something in Dave's expression softened anyway, as if he was meeting a gaze that wasn't actually there. When the show came back from commercial, Letterman didn't pick up with the thermostat collect. The cameras turned back to his desk, but he wasn't already mid-bit. Instead, he did something he almost never did. He stepped away from the script. "Folks," Letterman said, his voice noticeably quieter than the breezy tone he used for most transitions, "we're going to do something a little different right now." The studio, trained to laugh at any slight deviation, let out a soft, uncertain murmur instead. Paul looked up from his keyboard, eyebrows raised, hands hovering. This wasn't on the rundown. "There's a young man in our audience tonight," Letterman continued. "His name is Michael. He's 11 years old, and his mom wrote me a letter a few weeks ago." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was creased from being opened many times. He unfolded it slowly, almost reverently. "She told me that Michael watches this show every single night," he said. "She said he's never spoke, never laughed, but every night he's there, and she wanted me to know that this show is the one thing that makes their family feel." Letterman paused. The word lodged in his throat. Whole. The crowd went still. The air felt thicker somehow, charged with anticipation. "Michael," Letterman said, looking directly toward the third row. I'd like you to come up here. Would that be okay? Linda's hand flew to her mouth. Robert's eyes glazed instantly with tears. They both looked at their son, who remained exactly as he'd been, still, expressionless, staring forward. Linda leaned down anyway, close to his ear, her voice shaking. Do you want to go up there, sweetheart? Michael didn't move. He didn't look at her. He didn't blink any differently than he had before. But after a second, Robert stood up. He gently took Michael's hand, not squeezing, just holding, and began to rise. Michael rose with the motion was automatic, practical. Robert had been helping him stand his whole life. Together, slowly, like something out of a dream or a movie, they moved down the aisle. The audience didn't know what to do. A few people began to clap, then stopped, unsure if applause was appropriate for a moment that felt less like a show and more like a ceremony. The studio hushed deep. 3 steps led up from the floor to the stage. Robert guided his son up each one, step by step, careful not to rush. Michael's feet landed heavily but steadily on the wood. They approached Letterman. Dave stepped out from behind his desk. He pulled the guest chair closer to center stage and gestured toward it, making his movements slow and clear, like someone signaling to a skittish animal. Robert helped Michael into the chair, easing him down. Then he stepped back, just out of the main camera frame, standing with his hands clasped in front of him, like a man in church, waiting for something whole. Letterman sat down in the chair beside Mike. For a long, fragile moment, he just looked at the boy. Michael's gaze was still fixed somewhere in middle distance, not at Dave, not at the camera. His face remained blank. No fear, no curiosity, just Hey, Michael, Letterman said softly. I'm Dave. Nothing. I hear you watch the show every night, he added. That's pretty cool. I appreciate that. Still nothing. Letterman glanced over at Paul. Paul gave a small nod back, a look that said, I'm here. Take your time. You know what? Dave said after a pause, shifting in his seat. I'm not very good at sitting still either. How about we try something? He stood up and walked back to his desk, the cameras adjusting to follow. He picked up a thick stack of blue cue cards, the ones that had been guiding him through the show for years. He held them up for Michael to see. See these? He said. These are very important. These tell me what to say so I don't look like an idiot. The audience laughed, a small, nervous laugh this time, softer than usual. But here's the thing, Dave continued, turning back toward Michael. Sometimes, Michael, the best moments happen when you throw the cards away. He stepped forward, and then David Letterman did something he'd done 1,000 times as a bit, as a joke, as a way of signaling controlled chaos on his show. He threw the cue cards into the air. They fanned out like blue birds, fluttering and spinning under the hot stage lights before raining down across the set. Cards landed on the floor, on the desk, on the band platform. The studio chuckled. It was one of his signature moves. Michael didn't move, not a flicker. Letterman bent down, scooped up another stack of cards from the desk, and walked back into the spotlight. He threw them again higher, this with more theatrical flair. Cards whirled and tumbled in the air like oversized, rectangular snowflakes. Still nothing. Paul, watching from his piano, finally understood what Dave was trying to do. He laid his fingers on the keys and played a soft, whimsical melody, something that sounded like tiptoe, like trying to coax a smile out of stone. Dave lifted another stack of cards, looked at Michael, then at the audience. All right, he murmured. Let's really see what happens. He stepped back and hurled the cards high into the light. A blue storm of paper filled the stage. Then it happened. Michael's mouth moved. A tiny twitch, barely there, but unmistakable. Linda gasped. Robert grabbed the seat in front of Dave. Froze. Michael, he whispered. The boy's lips twitched again. And then, after 11 silent years, Michael Patterson smiled. Small, uneven, but undeniably a smile. The audience didn't cheer. They gasped. Paul stood from the piano, tears already forming. Dave dropped the last card and slowly knelt in front of the boy. There you are, he whispered, and Michael laughed. Soft, breathy, fragile, but a laugh. Linda broke down. Robert sagged into a seat. Crew members wiped their eyes. Paul played a trembling tender. What a wonderful world. Dave gently took Michael's hand. The boy didn't pull away. You were just waiting, Dave said, voice shaking, for the right moment. For the first time, Michael looked directly into someone's eyes, into Dave. It felt less like television and more like a door open. Dave stayed kneeling, holding Michael's hand for a full minute of live air. No joke, no cut, just two people in a pool of light. When Michael's father returned to the stage and lifted him from the chair, the audience rose, not applauding a performance, but a miracle. Dave sat at his desk, looked into the camera, and said quietly, "We'll be right back." But he didn't go backstage after. Instead, he walked straight into the audience and sat in front of Michael's family. "Tell me about him," he said. In the dimming studio, they told him everything: the diagnosis, the years of silence, the handprints Michael left on the TV whenever Dave appeared. Dave listened without looking at the clock. Before they left, he handed Robert a handwritten phone number. "If Michael ever needs anything, you call me." Over the next 3 years, Michael began to speak. Not suddenly, not magically, but undeniably. A door had opened. At 14, he recorded a message. "Thank you, Mr. Letterman. You helped me find my voice." Dave kept that tape on a shelf behind his desk till the day he retired. Years later, when asked about his most meaningful moment on television, he didn't mention President Award. award or rating. He talked about Michael. I threw some cards in the air, and a kid laughed, he said, and in that laugh, I heard everything that mattered. Michael grew up, became a teacher for children like himself. He knew how to wait, how to sit with silence. Every November 14th, he watches the old late night recording with his family. When his children ask, "Dad, why do you cry every time?" he says, "Because that was the night I learned I wasn't broke. I was just waiting for someone to see me." David Letterman didn't heal. He did something just as important. He saw him